I started writing under LF Oak in hopes that people wouldn't be so quick to, dash me against the rocks for being a woman. And that is really sad that we still live in that, those times. But, it is what it is. And I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that I, can reach who I want to reach.
Sure.
So far, I haven't had any issues. Most of my following is actually males now. And so I'm like, yes, I've done something right. I've actually gotten to the point that I wanted to get. So, knowing that, a guy can pick up the book and be like, this was really good. I'm going to go give it to my guy friends and be like, all right, I don't know. Maybe it's because I was raised with a bunch of boys too. And I always had that innate, desire to try to make them like me more. We never really got along for most of our lives till I moved out of the house. Maybe that's where it all comes from, but I imagine that has a lot to do with, just the fact that, yeah, I'm a woman and there's going to be emotion in there, but it's not the emotion that people think when they hear the word emotion.
So talk to us a little bit about where you grew up.
I grew up in the hot, dank, ugly deserts of Arizona.
Ew.
We moved a lot, but we always moved from one part of the desert to another part of the hot, dank, dry, ugly desert. So it was, I stayed there until I was 18.
Wow.
But there was nothing thrilling about it. I was ready to get out when I was 12.
Were your parents artists? What did they do for a living?
They were not artists at all. My mom is actually a real estate agent, and she has been since I was like 8. And then my dad actually worked off and on for the company Honeywell, where, machinery and, working on airplanes and, different, they did so much. I never even knew what he was actually doing. But in the time that he was off and on with that, he also owns an apartment complex in Arizona that he would take care of and run and everything. So
nice.
Not very artsy.
No, but it sounds like maybe you got a little bit of the entrepreneurial spirit from your mother. Is that a fair statement?
I would say I got that more from Josh than I did from my mother.
Oh, really? Okay.
I was not a salesperson at all my entire life. I remember when we first started doing Comic-Cons, how nervous I was just to be talking to people and trying to sell something because I was so terrible at it. But it grew on me, and now I love doing it. Hey, everybody. We are still here at Wizard World in New Orleans. Things are going well. It is Saturday, so there have been thousands of people coming through. It's just crazy. Right now, the aisle's pretty empty, but this has been packed through most of the day. So it's going well. It's fun. I saw Jason Momoa being pretty much tackled by a horde of girls. So that, I guess, is memorable. I feel bad for the guy, but I suppose he knew what he was getting into. Anywho, I guess this is pretty much what we're doing today. We got another hour and 20 minutes left of this, and then we will head on back to the hotel and get back at it tomorrow. But I was not like that at all. I thought I was going to be a teacher or something. I don't know.
Who is the most influential person in your life that's helped you realize your writer's journey?
I started writing when I was, I was a kid when I first started trying to write, but it was I didn't look up to anybody as a kid. I was raised in a very sort of tight knit community where I didn't get out much. I mean, I had some access, but I tend to think that my development as a kid was a little stunted by my, being stuck in the small community that wasn't exactly big on movies or really getting out. We stayed within the community. So I realized that actually when I met my best friend, Emily, was really when I started writing and putting a lot more attention into what I can actually create. And that started with, I was a pretty lonely kid. When I was by myself, I was daydreaming whenever, one of my friends, was around or something, then, I would role play a lot. And it was when I met Emily that really started writing and creating things together. She actually helped me create Jaydur. We created it together when we were kids. I mean, we drew our map and everything when we were like 13 or something. It was, I think, really when I got close to her that I realized, wait, hold on, I can do something with all of this that's happening up here.
Nice. I mean, what's one thing they instilled in you that helped your journey to where you are now?
I think the love of world building in the first place, the creation of maps and places and creation of characters. We used to do character profiles and things like that. Also, the love of research. As a kid, or as kids, we both we would spend a lot of time in the library. We would call ahead and get one of those quiet rooms, that were like soundproofed or something for like study groups. And we would reserve one for a couple hours, like almost every single weekend. We would go out to the library, and maybe not every single weekend, I might be exaggerating, but we spent a lot of time there. And I would always be researching things like ancient Egypt, the ancient Celts, while she was always looking into the Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And that was our fun. We'd just sit there for hours and write down notes and share notes and be like, oh, well, check this out. Oh, well, I just learned this. Oh, I had no idea about this. And it was a positive spin on everything, on actually researching. So that made it fun.
Do you guys still stay in touch? Is she a writer as well?
She writes. She's not like really active with it. She actually, she's going to kill me if I don't get this right. I think she said she's a producer now for like a small, like a filming group, but I think it's more like commercials and documentary type stuff than it is other stuff. She's probably gonna be mad at me for, it's going to come across like I wasn't listening. I was listening, I promise, Emily. But yeah, so she's more into the film part of things too, but she does write. She's really good at it too.
Nice. What age do you really think that you were starting to tell stories and beginning what you would consider the writing process?
Probably 14. I remember the very first time I actually sat there hovering over a notebook, ignoring my biology teacher in 9th grade as she was teaching or whatever it was she was doing. And I was writing my story, which eventually turned into The Lost Boys. It was like my baby story, the very first concept that I came up with. Of course, it changed, massively since then. But I mean, that was, I think, where I first really started putting characters and places and dialogue and all that together.
Do you remember what you really liked about that time when you were writing at that moment? Is there something that you look back on and go, that's I remember that fondly? The
feeling that I would get when I would write. I get really hyper focused in the stories, and considering I grew up being such a major daydreamer, it was just sort of like making it more tangible, like taking everything in my head and putting it down and realizing I was feeling the emotions. I was getting heart palpitations when something exciting was happening. And I would get all huffy and puffy and start looking around like, oh my God, I'm sitting in a class. Like, this is just a classroom and I'm over here like a whole world is going on in my head. So I think that escape was the greatest feeling in the world for me.
Were you ever on a different path that you looked to do something differently?
At one point, I did actually think I was going to be a teacher. That was a very short period of time in high school. Before that, I think the thing I wanted to be for the longest time was an Egyptologist. I was just crazy about Egypt. And I was like, all right, either I'm going to grow up and, you know, go to college and live like month to month in a trailer in ancient Egypt, like in Egypt, you know, doing some sort of archaeologist stuff, or I'm going to follow every other woman, every other girl at, you know, my age who was actually getting married at 18 and starting a family, you know, really young, because that was the cultural norm that I was raised in. So I was like, if I'm not getting married when I'm 18, then I'm going to be an Egyptologist. I remember going on a trip to Florida with my family one year when I was in 7th grade. And, you know, my parents were like, well, bring something that's going to keep you busy. And instead of bringing, you know, fiction novels or, you know, like play cards or something, I ended up actually bringing 7 different research books about hieroglyphs and how to teach yourself and how to learn it, you know, what means what. And so I had my stack of 7 books and I had my notebooks, and I would pull out my books while I was on the airplane. And I had this older man who was sitting next to me who just sat there and kept looking at me like, what is this? He eventually asked, he's like, you know what this is? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you doing this for school? I'm like, no, just for fun. Like, and apparently the guy had worked for NASA. So he was like, oh, like you're someone I could talk to, you know, at my age. I was like 14. And I mean, I had a full, you know, conversation with this guy about NASA and space and things that they're doing. And it was the fastest airplane ride I've ever been on. Besides that, I think a part of me always wondered if I would end up doing something on the crazier side of things, you know, like the metaphysics, or okay. I was always into things that were like interdimensional. I always loved things like physics and astrophysics and metaphysics and the science that makes your mind really expand. And I was really crazy about that stuff for, I mean, the majority of my life.
At what point did it turn for you? When did you really think, okay, I'm going to be a writer at this point?
I used to say for the longest time that it was when I first saw the Lord of the Rings trailers. And I was like, wait a second, like, what is this? Like, people are actually turning books into movies and doing something amazing. But when I think about it, I mean, that's when I think the real passion for it sparked. But in 2010 was when I took action, and I, you know, was sitting every day writing. At the time I was writing Nataya, and I was having another book published by a small press at the time. So that's when I was really actively putting time and energy and scheduling around writing. But it was after I think I got divorced and then realized that I don't have the education to get like a really good job that's going to pay, you know, the bills that I, you know, I'm probably going to have. And so I was like, well, I got to do something that I know I could do. And then I jumped into really writing and being more of like a public figure. So from like different, the social media platforms, and, you know, now I'm like live on Twitch every day, and, you know, we're going to the Comic-Cons all the time. And so that's really when it started, was just over the last few years. And I realized I'm like, it's either this or I'm going to be homeless. Like I need to do something active with what I know and what I can do. I am here to talk about blurb writing, book blurbing. You know, the little piece on the back of the book or on the inside of the cover that kind of makes the reader want to read the book in the first place. I worked on one yesterday for about 5 hours, to my shame. I generally have these things figured out before I write the book, or before I get too far into the book, because when you're writing a book, you have a whole stream of events going on and a whole lot of characters, and if you don't have things figured out before you really get yourself in the story, you don't really even know what you're writing about. Many of you have seen my book cover release of The Dragon Cager. This is a book that is close to my heart because it was sort of my shove into the real writing world. The Dragon Cager was sort of a spur of the moment, inspiration, and write it really quick book. That's how it started. Within 3 months, I had it all written beginning to end, edited a couple times by me, sent to a couple reader friends to see what they think about it, and then I let it stew for a few years. Not sure what happened. I had this book sitting there, finished from beginning to end, and I wasn't doing anything with it. So I got up one morning, logged onto Facebook, and was like, hey, anybody know any good editors, somebody who could help me out? I have a finished book, I just need a real professional person to look at it. A friend of mine messaged me with a suggestion. She soon introduced me to a friend of hers who happened to be kind of a big deal. She worked with huge names in fantasy writing and was one of the first editors for a massive franchise out there. So when I saw that, I was like, well, holy Shazbach, this woman's not gonna care about my stuff. I sent her the first 3 chapters and she's like, hey, this is fun, let me work with you. So I sent the rest to her and she loved it. And I was like, I was thinking, well, maybe she's just trying to be nice at first. But I was like, no, this woman's been doing this for like over a decade. She's like been doing this forever with huge names and huge companies, and I'm just sitting there like breaking out into a sweat. I think I'm breaking out into a sweat now just thinking about it. The best part about this is that she asked for me to send it back to her after I go through my edits. So I'm like, wow, okay, she like really liked me. This is a big deal. Then I don't know what happened. I was younger at the time. I went through the edits, I saw so much that needed changing, more developmental stuff. Then life happened, and then I just kind of left it alone for a while. But I came back to it when I was a little older and wiser and a little more seasoned in writing, and I had a couple things published, and then I decided, okay, well, let me look at that letter from this editor again and see how much work it would really be to get it done. So I go and I look through it, and me and my, you know, wiser brain, older brain, I realized it really wasn't all that bad. If I would have just blurbed this book when I first got the idea, before I really started getting into writing it, I would not be suffering through this now. But that was my own fault. I should have known better, and I should have written the blurb first. It literally took Josh to take me into the office, sit me down in front of the whiteboard, and go through story arc. It's almost done, and I'm going to have this book out. I have my cover, I have the blurb now. I had a blurb, don't get me wrong. I wasn't blurbless. You can't just release something when you don't have things figured out. Well, all right. That's it. I hope you all have a happy Friday, have some kind of awesome plans and things to do and places to go and ways to not get arrested unless that's really your bag, then go for it. But I'm not going to be doing that. I have a newsletter to be writing. If you are not part of that newsletter, I will put a link in the description box thing down below. Also, if you would be ever so kind and you have read Bounty of the Everdark or An Ogre's Tale or Nataya, please go and leave a review or a star rating on Amazon, something to, you know, kind of kick up a stuff there a little bit. I feel weird asking for stuff like that. I don't like to self-promote things like that. But I am humbly asking you for approximately 2 minutes of your time or less. If you could just go to Amazon, click on one of my books that you have read, and click the little star thingy. I hope you all have a wonderful Friday. Goblin Queen out.
You know, you and I have had this conversation before, and you've told the story many times, and I'm sure not just with me, but with others, about how you really started with the writing and the Wattpad experience and going from that and then moving into the book realm. But just kind of rehash it a little bit for us. Tell us a little bit of how that evolution happened.
At the time, I was actually calling it Zirconia. It was before I had changed it to Jaydur, and I was publishing with a small press that didn't work out in the end. And so, you know, I took everything off the market, renamed things, rewrote, replanned everything, rehashed everything. And then I was talking to the media marketer who ran Wattpad at the time in 2010. My thought behind that was, well, I see so many people being writers and nobody's getting anywhere. Like, what do I have to do that's different to actually step up the game a little bit, to do something that's, you know, I'm not going to do it by myself, obviously. I need help from something else, someone else. And so when I found Wattpad, I was like, all right, well, let's see if maybe somebody's going to be, you know, willing to talk there. And so I reached out and told them, you know, I was getting published, and they were really excited about it. And I, had shown them my following. At the time, it was a smaller following, but considering nothing was actually out yet, they're like, oh, like you're building up. So they're like, yeah, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. And so they put my story. Every week I would write a chapter, and every day they would put, like every 3 hours, my book would be on the front of their page. They pushed me out. I went out and spread the word about Wattpad too. And it was right around the time they were blowing up. So it was like perfect timing for me too. But yeah, so we just sort of helped each other out and pushed each other out, and then things blew up from there. And it was great.
Was there any stories or anything that you can recall that you thought, okay, this is how I want to write, or this is something that I could see myself writing?
It was sort of a mishmash of things. It happened right around the time when I was being more active, with writing. When I was really working on Natalia and pushing out Zirconia at the time, and I was in college, and I spent a lot of my days in the cafe, like between classes, writing, and I would watch Christopher Paolini, the author of Aragon. I would watch how he actually interacted with his fans and how he remained so humble and likable to everyone. And, and even with all of his success, and, I'd see other people who, would have half the success, and they're walking around like their, heads inflated. And it was just sort of I don't know. It was just sort of like this is what I want to be. This is how I want my readers to see me. I want to be the talkative, the funny one who's going to be friendly, and everybody's, nobody's going to have an issue with me. And at the same time, I was reading The Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. And that was when I really saw the kind of style that I was going for. I loved the world building and the real old fantasy feel of Lord of the Rings, but The Ranger's Apprentice, it was just... It's so much written in a way that a boy, a girl, a man, a woman, any age, can pick it up and find humor in it and really get sucked into the adventure. It's like there's no one particular audience. There's not like, a specific niche or something. It's anybody could pick it up and enjoy it. And I'm like, this is what I want to do. Like the way he just reaches to anybody, and it's like nobody can pick it up and be bored. It's just the greatest way of writing. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to have to learn. And I ended up actually emailing him back and forth and just being, originally I just emailed him to, say thank you. Like, just by reading your stuff, I've learned so much about the craft. And then we had a little bit of a back and forth there with emails. And that was just really encouraging for me. So I was like, yes, I'm going to be like the female John Flanagan. I'm not going to steal, his voice or something, obviously. But it's just that ability to reach any audience was something that I really wanted to do.
Is there something inherently that you did that very first time that now you just keep on doing?
I make sure there's humor in the story, no matter what is really going on. I mean, you're going to have the darker moments in the stories. You're going to have the more, negative emotions, sadness or anger or loss or grief or something. But I'm always going to find some way to flip it back to make sure that the reader is not going to be sitting there mopey about whatever's going on. I was raised with a sense of humor. Probably get it from having 4 brothers and no drama sister to, have to deal with. So humor was always an important thing for me. I'm also very in touch with emotions, and to be able to balance, my own emotions with humor and, reality is something that I try to put into just anything that I write. Hello! Sorry, let me try that again. Hi, everybody! Oh, I almost sounded like that guy from The Simpsons. Hi, everybody! Sorry, I'm done. You just stop. I figure now is as good a time as any to, I guess, kind of tell you guys what I've been up to all this time, huh? I'm gonna try to be, making this like a more regular thing, videos and whatnot. But in the last few months, I have been writing a lot and networking a lot and marketing a lot. But without all that, I would not be selling books. So, books! Bounty of the Everdark.
is doing pretty well. It's a little short story about, you know, dark elves and goblins and evil pixies, and you know, the ransom of a human queen. If you read An Ogre's Tale, this takes place in the same world, Jaydur. My world that I created by myself in here. Besides Bounty of the Everdark, I have Nataya, Wattpad edition, which means I took it from Wattpad and put it in book form. So, what was Nataya, A Fairy's Tale, is now Nataya, A Jaydurian Adventure. And it's exciting.
Who was the first character you created, and how have they shaped everything you've done since then?
The very first character might actually come as a surprise to some of the readers. I have a character in the Chronicles of Jaydur. His name is Kieran Kai. He is a feline, like a giant panther that's like, you know, 3 times the size of a regular panther. In one dimension is sort of, I have a couple different dimensions throughout the story, but the dimension that he lives in, he's white. And then in the real world, when he crosses, you know, through the gateways into our real world, he comes across to look just like a Black Panther, which the purpose of that is so people don't see something, you know, alien or abnormal. And I created him around the time when I was maybe 12 or 13, and I was reading Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher by Bruce Coville. It's a very popular book amongst us fantasy readers. I created Kieran around that time, and he's this character who is he's very wise, he's very gentle, he's very kind, and he can sort of see the direction that things are going. He can kind of tell when, you know, what may be causing a problem in a situation and how to push through this problem. And he's really good at encouraging the main character, Kaya, to keep her spirits up, to not, you know, let herself fall into moping or, you know, feeling like she's a failure, or really allowing herself to just sit and wallow in her own self-pity through all of the, you know, trouble that she goes through. So he's sort of like a guide through the whole thing.
Is he the catalyst for a lot of your humor?
He is actually not. The actual catalyst for all the humor would be Oake, who's the male character on the books, on the covers. He has a very dry sense of humor, but everybody loves it. So I'm like, all right, like it's perfect. I mean, you have the main character who's just this ball of emotions, and you know, you have Kieran, who's very calm and mellow and very like, this is the path, stay on the path, it's going to be okay. You know, I trust in you, you know, you have all this, you know, to work with, and we're going to help you. And then you have Oake, who's just dying every time she, you know, ends up having a panic attack, and is just like, God, will she ever like move on through her troubles? And it's just, he's very rude in the beginning, which in a way I also do that very humorously. So it's like people, they pick up the book, so they're laughing at what he's doing, but they also really hate him at the beginning. Of course, he changes over time. So you hate him in the beginning, you start getting, you know, warmed up a bit in the middle. By the end, you're rooting for him, I think. Well, most people are.
Where you begin with the world building process, where do you start with?
See, again, this is one of those, like, I used to just sit here and go through interviews and be like, okay, what do people want to hear? And I'm like, no. I'm going to really sit here and go back to everything. And especially with Jaydur, I start with a landmark. And that's often how my chapters start too, is with a specific landmark. And I really suck at exposition. That's my weakness. And there's no, getting over that except for practice, obviously. I start with a landmark that, I sort of use it as a basis for, the environment, for where they're going, people who can look on the maps to see, what direction they're going. They have more of an idea, and the exposition that I suck at so bad makes a little more sense. And so I start there, and then I build outward. I actually started the entire map with a location called Sanctuary, which is a waterfall with caves that go, throughout the mountains. And the entire world of Jaydur started from that one little speck there and turned into what it is now.
I mean, you mentioned that you don't write for a specific audience, so you try to be as broad as possible. But you do have a category in which you're trying to write within that has very strict rules in terms of, supplying that audience with what it is you're trying to say. So what is the hardest aspect of that for you?
I do prefer to write for a broader audience. For example, like Nataya was very much like anybody can pick it up. It's so ridiculous. There's nobody that I could say, oh, this is not really for you, except probably people who, read nonfiction or something. But it's generally, it's for anybody. That was really easy to write. With The Lost Voice, with the Chronicles of Jaydur, it's a little bit more difficult since I'm trying to stick to like the traditional fantasy feel. And that's how I market myself, is it, traditional fantasy. I think the hardest part is keeping people happy with what they expect to see in the stories that they're reading. For example, I don't write romance. I don't read romance, and but the books that I write, that has a lot of emotion to them, especially the series. There's a lot of emotional turmoil, not like romantically or, lovey-dovey stuff, but just real, you get inside the psyche and the minds of the characters and understand the struggles that they're going through. And it's a lot of, grieving throughout the series. And at the same time, I try to keep it realistic, and you have to have some emotional connection between characters. And though sometimes, you might have two people who you're trying to create an emotional connection. You don't want it to be romantic. It might come across as romantic if you don't do it right. And I think that's probably one of my biggest issues. I have so many readers who are like, we love the emotion, we love the turmoil that you put in there, but don't write romance. Don't put any, romance in there. I'm like, okay, I'm not putting romance in there. And other people, when they hear emotional, they think immediately, oh, this is going to be a romance novel. This is going to be too, touchy-feely or something. Yeah. And it's not that. It's just like getting into the hearts and the minds and the spirits of these characters and making the reader really be able to feel what they're going through. That's probably my biggest struggle, is writing something out and being like, okay, this is great. Now let me go. I've actually had to send my stories to several people and be like, okay, how did this relationship come across to you? And, whether it came across as romantic or not was a big thing. I'm like, okay, I can't send this to the editor until I fix this, because you're not supposed to think that this is what's happening. It's not supposed to come across that way. So
very interesting.
Yeah, I can write romance if I want. I just don't enjoy it. And I don't want to be known for being a romance author or having, like too much romance. Not that I have anything against them. It's just I want my name to be lined with fantasy. Yeah. And that's my audience right there. And I don't want, people to be like, oh, maybe you won't like her stuff because there's, all this lovey-dovey stuff or whatever. I'm like, no, it's not lovey-dovey. Like, grief and anger is an emotion too. And you have a lot of that. So it's a lot of loss and struggles, and it's just really going into the characters.
What has your audience taught you, or that you thought that you were either naive to or just plain wrong about, that you now apply to every story or character going forward?
I'm going to admit that when I first started writing and publishing, I wrote very, very weak, useless women, female characters. I remember one of my editors being like, all right, let me try to explain this. She's like, remember that plant in the WALL-E movies, or in the movie WALL-E, Disney's WALL-E? The little robots carrying around this little plant. And the plant is the purpose of the story,
right?
But it's just being carried around through the whole thing. They're like, this is your main character. Your main character is the plant. It sits there useless. She's not doing anything. She's not active. There's no reason for the character to really, or for the readers to really grasp and care about her. And I think that's when I started paying attention to, actually making my character go out and take action and, kill some people. I can't just leave that up to all the guys in the books. But
I think that's also a sad statement that you have to have actually somebody kill somebody for them to be effective.
Yes. Which I mean, I don't know if this will even fit in any of this, but someone had told me that they don't consider my writing YA or YA friendly because she kills goblins, and she kills creatures, and they're like, and there's death, and like there's bellies spilling. And I'm like, well, first my editor complains that I make weak female characters. Now I ever kill someone, nobody's happy. I don't go into too much detail, so I still think it's YA friendly.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a blurred line now, right? I mean, kids are getting smarter and smarter, and they're also reading more and investing more time in our world, and our world is not very pretty.
That's exactly what I've told people too. It's just like, what kind of world do you think your kid's living in? Like, what are you protecting them from? You can't protect them from the world. You can prepare them for it, but there's no protecting them. Like they're gonna have to step out in one way or the other.
What characteristics do you value in your protagonist and antagonist that you always try to stick to?
Again, I have a lot of feelings in there, and the fact that I make feelings or emotions so strong in the characters that there's not like, I mean, you could have your good character, but they're going to have negative traits about them. They're going to do, stupid things, or they're going to get jealous, or they're going to, be greedy. There's going to be something negative there that's going to make them realistic and something that, the reader can really relate to. At the same time, you're going to have your bad guys who, they're going to be considered evil by one part of the world, but at the same time, they're loved by someone. They're really revered and respected by someone. And that's an important trait to bring out and to make everybody realize that, it's not like you're just throwing Satan in your book and, expecting like a real story to come out of it. Like you got to have that balance and that whole range of emotions from everybody, good and bad.
Do you feel like your antagonist is really a good guy or somebody who thinks they're a good guy for the beliefs that they have?
This is a good question. Let me think how to word this. The antagonist in this series in particular is very aware of what he's doing. He's aware of who he's hurting. He's just gotten to a point where he doesn't care. And it doesn't affect him because he wants what he wants.
In your mind's eye, what was one or two of your most favorite scenes you've ever written?
Well, in book one, a little background information. One of the favorite scenes was when Kaya, the main character, she has discovered that she's going to be reborn in another world. In the process that, the other higher beings, Oake, the guardians and the keepers and the bodyguards are trying to deal with the threat. And in that time, they're pushing her away to keep her out of the way and with it, out of reach of the antagonist. And for the elves in this world, their relationships are a little different. They have a specific kind of kiss where once they have this kiss, it creates more than just, an emotional bond. It is like a spiritual bond that is almost telepathic. And her struggle in the first book is letting go of emotions, letting go of her nostalgia, letting go of everything that she's wanted and held on to for her whole life. And she, as she's, being sent away, she decides to share that kiss with her fiance. And Arkai, the bodyguard, just loses his freaking mind because at that point, she's already caused so much issue by her emotional attachment and her emotional struggles, her inability to let things go. And the fact that she created this new bond with someone that she was going to have to let go. I mean, there's no way that they were going to, obviously be together or something, but she had to cut herself off from all that. And she created this bond, and just being able to bring out the rage that Arkai feels at the same time as showing her fear, her regret, and her sense of guilt, and frustration and disappointing everyone around her. And at the same time as having her fiance's emotions of his panic of, oh God, what have we done? And just the whole chaos of that moment was really fun. But outside of that, there's a scene in Rise of the Elders where Kaya, the main character, she is a seer. You get that in the first book. And she goes through this phase that makes her temporarily blind. And in the second book, there's when she first starts going through the blindness, she's having visions that are very violent. She struggles through them. She's, thrashing around. And for a long time, she's dealing with these and unconscious through most of it, or just not present mentally through most of it, while Arkai is dealing with her and protecting her from all the, bad guys that she's attracting through the process. There's magic being emitted from her as she's, going through it. And there's this point where it's just a very general, there's nothing crazy going on. Arkai is actually taking her from one part of the map to the other part of the map in a covered wagon. And she, at that point, had been going through this phase for so long, and she finally started calming down. And when they're in the middle of their travels, she has one of the first times that she wakes up where she's very aware of where she is and what's going on. She still can't see yet, but he goes to the back of the wagon. He gives her a fresh, set of clothes. He guides her hand to, where the water is at, where the food is at in the wagon. He, is just explaining to her, we need to keep moving. Here's this, here's this, here's this. And it was just the emotion that I felt in that moment of the character's growth. The way that each character is so different than they were in the very beginning of the series was just like, oh my God, this is the best character development I've ever written in my life. And it was just, nothing really special happens. It was just, I think that's forever going to be just melded into my mind and in my memory of what I really enjoyed writing. And it was just so intense for me.
What do your fans tell you is their favorite scene? What are some of the scenes they love to talk to you about?
Actually, in Rise of the Elders, there is a scene where Kaya accidentally gets drunk on elvish wine during a party where she's surrounded by elvish nobles. And every message that I've gotten so far from readers was about that one scene. So, and it's not, nothing crazy happens. It's just the way that she speaks and the interaction between her and Arkai, who's realizing that they've put her in the hands of these nobles thinking she's going to be safe and protected by the walls of this fortress. And she's over there getting drunk and making a fool of herself in front of their allies. So it was just it was hilarious. But apparently that's so far has been the I guess most popular scene in that series.
Do people have questions about that scene, or do they just say, I love that scene?
They just thought it was hilarious. Just her interaction with Arkai and with one of the guards there, that it's just because she's so proper throughout a lot of the story. And, she goes into how she's never been a drinker. So she didn't even recognize what she was drinking until before she was, tipping over the place and not being able to speak correctly or answer people's questions. And it was just a funny scene.
Did you like writing that one too?
I did. But I laugh at all my dumb jokes. So I didn't think it was that, oh, this is going to be great. Everybody's going to love this. It was just like, oh, this is hilarious. I'm going to put this in and see if anybody notices.
That moment that you spoke of that you really love in the covered wagon, is that the moment for you when these characters really took shape, or is there a certain point in which you think you really want to make sure that your characters take shape?
Everybody has noticed so far. All the readers that have actually read Rise of the Elders has noticed the moment that there's been the major turnaround, and it was after the blindness phase has already started, but she's gotten past the violent part of it, and she's more present and aware of what's going on, but still blind. But that so far, I've had all the readers point out that once that one area, they're like, yeah, that's an insane, crazy turn, but it makes sense at the same time with how it happened.
And that was your intention?
Yeah.
Nice. Now that you have it all written down, you've done your first draft. Where do you start your editing process? What's the first thing you tackle?
The flow of the first pages. If the first like 3-4 pages don't read either excited or, you know, emotionally intense in some way to really, you know, grip the readers, then I'm gonna doubt the entire book. So I always go back. I fit in any information that is, you know, absolutely necessary for the rest of the book without, you know, turning it into an info dump. But it's that flow of the first few pages. I cannot continue until I have that done.
Are you of the belief that in the first 10 pages you'll know if it's a good story or not?
My immediate response wants to be yes, but at the same time, I've picked up books that, I mean, the first 3 chapters are really slow and really boring, and I quite literally skipped those chapters and started in the middle of the book, and then, you know, went from the middle to the end, and then read the beginning to tie it all up. But I hate having to do that. So, you know, I am typically the person where if you don't get me in the first few pages, I'm going to let it go. Unless, you know, you're like a friend or something, then I'm like, all right, I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to start in the middle, and then I'll go to the end, and then I'll tie it up.
I'm wondering if you can do this, but I'm wondering if you could take us on a little tour of Jaydur without giving away any major spoilers. Is there a way you could do that? Is there something you can show us that, from your mind's eye, from your perspective when you're writing this, you know, not the audience perspective, but your perspective when you're going through this world that you've built and the characters you've built? Is there something that you're looking at and touring, you know, kind of give us a bird's eye view of that, if that's possible?
The symbolic parts of the story that
the symbolism.
That I see as I write is really a whole lot of story of this one person who has all of her love, all of her desires, all of her life goals, everything torn away from her so that she's sort of left in the pits. And she is forced to go through a whole process of learning to allow those things to fall away, so that she can be a better person and she can help the world become a better place, that she could go out and guide people and speak to people and show people what is really important in the world. And at the same time, Rise of the Elders was more about her actually, you know, the blindness phase is sort of symbolic of her refusing a natural aspect of herself that she knows is there, something that is so natural and needed in most people's lives for the reason of gaining more knowledge of herself. It's sort of taking yourself away, becoming something of a hermit, spending time to get to know who you are, what your real worth is, and how you can go and really spread that and help others get to the point in their lives that they need to be to be a, I guess, more useful and helpful and safer world overall. But all this stuff was things that I was focusing on as I was writing, and trying to find a way to, you know, make it come across just through the concepts. You know, the different sort of adventures that they go on, or the different kinds of struggles that they go through, I mean, it goes from, the physical loss of sight to, actual heartbrokenness or, being frozen in fear for, some sort of situation. At the same time, being able to push through this wall of fear to get done what you need to get done. And, screw expectations, screw what you've been raised to think or believe your whole life.
What is the most prevalent landscape that you like to incorporate in your stories? Is it the sea, the air, the land? Is there a certain beauty that you like to capture oftentimes when you're writing?
Yes, definitely. So it's the woods. The woods in autumn, especially. It might have something to do with me being raised in a desert. And I remember coming out to North Carolina for the first time, visiting my cousins, and almost crying at the sight of trees, of so many trees. But yeah, it's woods, midday woods. My favorite time of the day in real life is like 11 a.m., 11:30, around that time, because the sunlight is whiter than usual, like the color white, versus the yellowy sort of haze that you see throughout much of the day. I wonder if I'm the only person who sees this sometimes, because I know it sounds like crazy talk when I say it out loud, but it's like the light is different, the sun rays are different, and I feel a little more vitality, throughout that time of the day. And I put a lot of that in the books. And at the same time, I also have rainy autumn days. So I talk a lot about the smell of the wet leaves or mud or whatever. And it's just that I think these are some of the things that I didn't have for, most of my life. And then I stepped out, moved to this part of the world where suddenly it's all there and it's all so clear in my mind, and I like to share that.
Do you like staying in this world? Do you hope that someday you'll eventually grow out of it or walk away from it, or are you comfortable with, if this is all you ever write from, this is what it'll be?
I'm comfortable with it. At the same time, I have stories like The Dragon Cager, which don't take place in the world at all. It's, that one's like an alternate 19th century England. I have a couple other stories that are more like, I have one that was very much inspired by Terminator. I have one coming up that was, inspired by X-Men. And so, I have like my more nerdy superhero type of stuff coming out as well. But I just wanted to finish the series before I start putting out all the other stuff. The other stuff is definitely not like this. So I want to make sure everybody has something, the 3-piece of like, this is the world, this is the, the big main part. Let me see what else you can do now.
You have a healing practice, and you do some meditations and things like that. Are you ever in the marketplace to do a nonfiction book for that kind of idea, or are you just doing it and not worrying about that in the long run?
I actually started one like 2 days ago. Nice. Perfect timing, Joe. But that one, the one that I'm working on now, is more of like a memoir, I think. Would you call it a memoir? Like, just sort of going through how I came to that side of things and how it's affected my life, and how religion affected that, because I grew up very religious, and religion and metaphysics does not mix. And so I have a secret blog that nobody knows about, where I actually had written things about Christianity and the metaphysics, and I get so many, hundreds of emails all the time from people being like, this is happening, and this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm experiencing, but I'm a Christian. How do I handle this? And just the fact that there's so many people that are going through something similar to what I did as a kid, I'm like, yeah, why not? This might be worth actually putting out. It wouldn't be under Lilian Oake, though. It would be under my real name. So I like to keep those two things separate.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. Well, we'll look forward to that. And I'll look forward to interviewing the real you then. Of course, I'm kidding, but
it's just the name that's fake. I'm dorky in all aspects.
I think you answered this question already, but what does every LF Oak story have to have?
The sense of magic in the chaos and that humor. What I had actually written, I wrote the little note here was, the sense of magic amidst the chaos and rain in the autumn. My daydreaming was my magic amid the chaos in my life that took place in a world with almost no rain and no autumn. So it's sort of like they tie into one another.
I don't think I asked you this the last time, but have you visioned your book as maybe a film or TV or an anime even? Have you imagined that?
When I first started writing Jaydur, I did actually imagine it as an anime. In 2010, I had a dream that I was on the set of the third Jaydur book being turned into a movie. I don't dream about stuff like that, you know, but it was extremely vivid, and I was there at the scene where basically, well, I guess a little backstory here. In my book, there's sort of this alternate dimension. It's sort of like the spirit plane, and it's where the four goddesses, they basically live there, and it's all sort of just very atmospheric. There's no background really. It's all sort of like the color of dawn, you know, like the, you know, early morning, you know, like oranges and pinks and, you know, sort of really white light. There's this sort of this like platform in the middle of all this atmosphere, and it's surrounded by mirrors. I mean, like hundreds of mirrors, and each mirror, I mean, they're flashing different, you know, scenes of basically what's happening in the real world, in our modern day world, and in the world of Jaydur, because it's a portal fantasy is what Jaydur is. And yeah.
Is it a judgment center though? Is it like showing like rights and wrongs that you did in your life, or is it just going on at the time?
It's literally just what's happening in the moment. I had first meant it to be sort of like one section was for past, one section was for present, and one section was for future. But I decided to just sort of stick to present, and you know that they're just seeing, I mean, just, you know, in both worlds, different places, and each of the goddesses, they can stop one mirror and just focus on one, either one person or one creature, or one place, you know, in the world. I called that the Chamber of the Voices. And that actually came from Chamber of the Sages from Zelda, Ocarina of Time. That whole area, I remember when I was about 12 years old and I was laying in bed, and I don't remember what happened in my life at the time, but it was a big deal to me that I was I was angry and I was upset about something. I guess I was about as depressed as a 12-year-old could get. And I literally just laid there in bed, closed my eyes, and said, I'm going to create my own place that I could just escape to mentally whenever something like this happens, because I just can't even. And so I laid there and I just, you know, created the picture in my head, the whole, you know, the whole chamber, and eventually put it in my writing later on. But that was the exact scene that I had dreamed in 2010, being on the set with the character who plays, you know, the bodyguard of the Four Voices, and actually talking to the actor and just crying because, oh my God, you look just like him.